Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of information security management. And we're going to be using kind of a unique source. It's a 50-question CISM assessment test.
Oh, very cool.
Now, you might be listening to this thinking like, oh, am I about to take some sort of practice exam here?
Right.
But that's not really what we're going for. Our goal is to really understand the reasoning and the strategy behind the answers.
I like it.
So we can all sort of, level up our InfoSec knowledge.
Yeah.
And I've got a seasoned expert here to guide us through these questions.
Yeah. I'm happy to be here. I think, it's one thing to be able to answer a multiple choice question, but it's another thing to be able to actually, apply those concepts. And that's really, what we want to try to do today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's jump into it. We're going to tackle the first 25 questions today.
Okay.
And the first one, right out of the gate, asks about developing an information security plan. And you'd think, right, the first step would be let's do a vulnerability assessment or, let's get some firewalls in place.
Right. Start buying technology tools.
But the answer emphasizes the importance of analyzing the business strategy first.
Yeah, that's really critical because, at the end of the day, information security has to support the business.
Right.
And if you don't understand what the business is trying to achieve, you're kind of, shooting in the dark.
So it's about aligning those security efforts with the overall goals and priorities of the organization.
Exactly. And also, understanding things like, the organization's risk appetite, how they view risk, how information flows through the different processes.
Right. It's almost like you need to build that blueprint.
Absolutely. It's the foundation.
Before you start, putting the roof on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So question 2 kind of build on that idea, asking what primarily drives information security governance? And again, it's not regulations, it's not the latest technology, it's that same business strategy.
Yeah, it's about making sure that those security practices align with what the organization is actually trying to do.
It's almost like, a tailor making a bespoke suit,
Absolutely.
You got to understand the client.
You got to understand the measurement.
Before you start cutting the fabric.
Exactly.
And speaking of fitting perfectly, question 3 brings up privacy regulations.
Okay.
And their focus is on protecting identifiable personal data. So it's not just about locking down every single bit of data, but being really strategic about the information that could actually impact someone's privacy.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction because, not all data is created equal.
Right.
And the regulations recognize that we need to be, really careful about protecting information that could directly harm an individual.
Yeah. So question 4 then takes us into the financial side of things. And it suggests that investments in security technology should be justified through value analysis, not just vulnerability scans.
Yeah, that's a common pitfall I think a lot of organizations fall into is just, running a scan and then trying to patch every single vulnerability that comes up.
Right.
But that's not really a strategic approach.
No.
You really need to look at the potential impact of a threat and weigh that against the cost of mitigation.
So it's about making informed decisions based on the value of the assets you're protecting.
Exactly.
So question 5 highlights the importance of leadership buy-in and asks about the best sponsor for an information security steering group.
Okay.
And, I was kind of surprised by the answer. It's the COO.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive, but...
I was thinking like CIO or CSO, right?
Right, yeah. But having the COO as a champion for information security sends a really powerful message to the whole organization.
It's like saying, hey, this is not just an IT thing.
Right.
This is a core business function.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also helps to elevate the importance of security and get buy-in at all levels.
It's like having the head chef endorse the importance of food safety in the kitchen.
I like that analogy.
Everyone's going to take it seriously.
Exactly.
Okay, so question 6 gets into defining minimum security standards for the technical infrastructure.
Right.
And the answer points to security architecture. But what's the difference between security strategy guidelines, models, and architecture?
Yeah, so think of it this way, a security strategy that outlines the high-level goals and vision for security.
Okay.
Guidelines provide those best practices and recommendations. Models are frameworks for understanding and analyzing security.
Right.
But the architecture, that's the blueprint that brings all of those elements together.
Right.
It defines the specific, controls the infrastructure, the processes that are going to enforce those security standards.
So it's where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So question 7 is all about getting senior management support for information security initiatives.
Okay.
And I've always found that speaking their language is crucial.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what resonates with senior management is how security impacts the organization's ability to achieve its goals.
Right.
So framing security discussions around organizational risk,
Mm-hmm.
showing them how security vulnerabilities can actually hinder their objectives.
And that gets their attention.
That's the key to getting their buy-in.
It's not just about preventing breaches, it's about enabling success.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to question 8, which presents a scenario where a data center manager has final say on all security projects.
Okay.
Why is that problematic from a security governance perspective?
Well, it creates a potential conflict of interest.
Oh.
The data center manager's primary focus is on operational efficiency and uptime.
Right, keeping the lights on.
Exactly. And that might sometimes clash with robust security practices.
So you need that independent oversight to make sure that, security is not being compromised.
Absolutely. Checks and balances are important.
Question 9 is kind of a curveball. It asks, which requirement should have the lowest priority in information security, technical, regulatory, privacy, or business?
Okay.
And I would have thought business requirements would be at the top of the list.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick question
Okay.
because, while business needs are important, they shouldn't be the sole driver of security decisions. We really need to strike a balance between all 4 of those areas.
Right.
Technical requirements, make sure the solutions are sound.
Yeah.
Regulatory, that you're compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy protects individuals.
Yeah.
And then business requirements ensure everything aligns with the goals.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
It is.
And finally, question 10 focuses on a new information security manager. What should be their top priority?
Well, the most important thing is building strong communication channels with those steering committee members.
Okay.
That open dialogue is going to be essential for understanding, the organization's needs, their risk tolerance, their priorities.
Right. It's about building those relationships from day one.
Exactly. Trust and collaboration are key.
Great. So we've covered a lot of ground here exploring those foundational principles of information security management. But our deep dive doesn't stop. Here we got 15 more questions to tackle, and those get into the nitty-gritty of risk management and response.
All right, let's do it. So let's dive into question 11, shall we?
Let's do it.
Which tackles that recovery point objective.
Ah, the RPO.
Yeah, RPO.
That's a good one.
It's all about determining, how much data loss an organization can tolerate before things start to get really bad.
Yeah. It makes me think about those late night data backups, hoping that, if disaster strikes, they're going to save the day. But the question here is asking who's best suited to define that RPO for business applications, and it's pointing to the COO.
Yeah.
I was thinking, CIO or CISO, so more in the technical realm.
Yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive, but it really comes down to understanding the business impact of data loss. The COO, they have that big picture view of the entire organization.
Right. They can see how it all fits together.
Exactly. They know which applications are mission critical, which data is absolutely essential, and they can determine what level of disruption the business can handle.
So it's not just about the technical aspects of recovery. It's about aligning that with the operational reality of the business.
Exactly. And the COO is in the best position to make that call.
Okay, that makes sense. Question 12 then emphasizes that risk assessment isn't just about quantifying threats, putting numbers to things.
Right.
It's about justifying risk mitigation strategies.
Yeah.
What's the difference there?
Well, it's about moving beyond those theoretical calculations and turning risk assessments into actionable insights.
Okay.
So instead of just saying, oh, there's a 10% chance of this happening, you're actually using the assessment to build a case for investing in security controls.
Right, you're showing the value of those mitigations.
Exactly, you're demonstrating the return on investment.
Okay, so question 13 puts us right into a crisis scenario. A data breach has happened. Customer data has been compromised. What's the first step?
The absolute first step is notifying the data owners.
Right.
Now, it might seem like, you'd want to go to senior management or maybe regulatory agencies first.
Right.
But the data owners, they're the ones who are ultimately responsible for the security and privacy of that data.
So they need to be in the loop immediately.
They need to know what's going on so they can assess the impact and start taking steps to mitigate the damage.
Okay. Makes sense. Question 14 zooms out a bit and asks about the primary goal of a corporate risk management program?
Well, the big picture goal is to make sure that the organization can achieve its objectives,
Okay.
despite the inherent risks that exist in any business.
Right, so it's not about eliminating all risk, because that is often impossible.
Exactly.
It's about managing it effectively.
It's about finding that balance, so
Yeah.
that the organization can operate and thrive.
Question 15 then links asset classification to cost-effective security measures.
Yeah, it's all about proportionality.
Okay.
Your security controls should match the value and sensitivity of the assets you're protecting.
Right, you wouldn't put the same lock on a garden shed as you would on a bank vault.
Exactly. It's about allocating resources strategically.
Okay, so question 16 throws us a bit of a curveball here.
Yeah.
What happens when your outsourced IT provider, their service level agreement doesn't meet your organization's security standards?
Oh, that can be a tricky situation.
Yeah.
But, the important thing is not to jump to conclusions.
Don't hit that panic button.
Don't hit that panic button.
Yeah.
You really need to assess the situation, understand the gaps between that SLA and your requirements, and then work with the provider to try to address those shortcomings.
So open communication collaboration, that's key.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't work out, then you can explore other options, but start by trying to work together.
Exactly.
Okay, question 17 reminds us that before diving into that formal risk assessment, there's a key step.
Yeah, you need to understand those business objectives. You need to know what the organization is trying to achieve.
Before you can assess how risk might impact those goals.
Precisely.
It's like that alignment with business strategy again.
It all comes back to that.
Okay, question 18 gets to the heart of risk management. What are we ultimately trying to achieve with all our efforts?
We're trying to minimize residual risk.
Okay.
And that's the risk that remains even after you've implemented all your security controls.
Right. So it's the risk that you accept, because further mitigation would just be too costly or too complex.
Exactly. It's that balancing act again.
Finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
Question 19 asks about who gets the final say when it comes to implementing mitigating controls.
Yeah, and this might surprise some people, but it's actually the business manager.
Okay.
While the security team provides those recommendations and that expertise, the business manager, they're the ones who are ultimately accountable for the success of their operations.
Right. So they have to weigh those costs and benefits and make the final decision.
Exactly.
It's a shared responsibility. Okay. Question 20 takes us back to those practical steps involved in an information risk analysis. Where do we even begin?
The logical starting point is a comprehensive asset inventory.
Okay.
You need to know what you're protecting before you can assess the risk.
Right. It's like taking inventory of all your valuables before you decide what kind of security system to install.
Exactly. You need to know what you're dealing with.
Okay. Question 21 demystifies the purpose of a public key infrastructure, or PKI.
Yeah, PKI is all about establishing trust in the digital world.
Okay.
It's about making sure that the parties involved in a transaction or communication, they are who they say they are.
Right. It's like a digital passport.
It is. It's a way to verify identities and ensure that those communications are secure and tamper-proof.
Okay. Question 22 takes a bit of a turn and focuses on physical security. What's a simple way to prevent those accidental system shutdowns?
Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best, and in this case, it's protective switch covers. Just those little plastic covers that prevent someone from accidentally bumping a switch and causing an outage.
They might be small, but they can prevent some big problems.
Exactly.
Question 23 reminds us that, it's not all about technology and processes. It's also about people.
Right, the human element.
So what should an information security manager emphasize when talking to HR?
The importance of security awareness training.
Right.
Employees, they can be the weakest link, but they can also be your strongest asset.
If they're properly trained.
If they're properly trained.
Okay, so question 24 asks about the main reason for conducting those security awareness programs.
It all boils down to reducing human risk.
Okay.
By educating employees about threats and best practices, we can minimize those errors and those incidents that happen because of human behavior.
It's about creating that culture of security awareness.
Absolutely.
Okay, and finally, question 25 offers a practical tip for reinforcing that awareness day to day.
One effective way is to display messages at every logon. Just little reminders about security responsibilities and best practices.
Little nudges in the right direction.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from foundational principles to risk management to those practical tips. But our journey through this CISM assessment test isn't over yet.
No, we still have 25 more questions to go, and those delve into the technical aspects of information security.
Okay, so we're going to be getting into the nuts and bolts of how to secure systems and data in this constantly evolving threat landscape.
Right. We're going deeper into the technical trenches. All right, so let's jump into those technical details, shall we?
Let's do it.
Question 26 asks about the best defense against sniffing attacks.
Oh, sniffing attacks. So we're talking about someone trying to intercept data as it's traveling across the network.
Exactly. It's like eavesdropping, but in the digital world, and they're after that sensitive information.
So how do we stop them?
Encryption. That's your best bet.
Encryption.
Yeah.
So it's like scrambling that conversation,
Yeah.
making it unreadable to anyone who's not supposed to see it.
Exactly. It renders that intercepted data completely useless to the attacker.
Encryption, it's like that secret decoder ring we had as kids,
I like that analogy.
but with much higher stakes.
Absolutely. Much higher stakes.
Okay, so question 27 takes us back to that public key infrastructure, or PKI, and this time it's focusing on trust. What's the connection there between a digital signature and the trustworthiness of the certificate authority?
Well, it's all about the chain of trust. You know, a digital signature, it relies on a digital certificate to verify the sender's identity.
Okay.
But how do you know that certificate is legitimate?
Right.
That's where the certificate authority, or CA, comes in. They're like the trusted third party.
Okay.
They vouch for the authenticity of that certificate. So if you trust the CA, you can trust the digital signature.
It's like a passport.
Yeah.
You know, it's been verified by a government agency, so you trust it.
Exactly.
Okay, question 28 takes us into a high-security environment, a data center protected by biometric access control. And it talks about false reject rate and false acceptance rate. I always get those mixed up.
Yeah, those terms can be a bit tricky. So false reject rate, or FRR, that's the probability of the system incorrectly rejecting a legitimate user.
Okay.
And false acceptance rate, or FAR, that's the probability of incorrectly accepting an unauthorized user.
Okay, so it's like, one is saying no to the good guys and the other is saying yes to the bad guys.
Exactly. And in a high security setting, like a data center, you actually want a higher FRR.
Really? So it's better to be overly cautious and maybe inconvenience a legitimate user than to accidentally let an unauthorized person in.
Precisely, the consequences of a false acceptance in a data center could be disastrous, so you want to minimize that risk.
Better safe than sorry, especially when we're talking about protecting critical infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Okay, question 29 asks about the first step in establishing a comprehensive information security program.
And it's tempting to jump right into those specific policies and controls.
Right.
But the most important thing is to develop that overarching security plan.
That's like the blueprint.
It is. It's the roadmap that outlines those security goals, priorities, the overall approach.
So you need that clear vision before you start implementing anything specific.
Exactly.
Question 30 explores how authorization policies can support regular staff rotation, people changing roles, moving departments. How do you keep up with all those access changes?
Role-based authorization is a great way to manage that.
Okay.
So instead of assigning permissions to individuals, you assign them to roles within the organization.
Right. So when someone changes roles, their access rights change automatically.
Exactly. It's a much more efficient and dynamic way to handle access control.
It's like a self-adjusting system.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. Question 31 presents another incident response scenario. This time, it's data leakage. A system detects employees sending confidential data to their personal email accounts. What should the information security manager do first?
Well, it's important to resist that urge to jump to conclusions or take immediate disciplinary action.
Don't go firing people just yet.
Not yet. You need to investigate first. Understand the scope of the issue, identify who's involved, gather the evidence, and then you can determine the appropriate course of action.
So it's about due diligence, getting all the facts before making any decisions.
Exactly.
Question 32 highlights that tension between performance pressures on IT and the need for strong security controls.
Yeah.
How do you balance those competing priorities?
It requires strong leadership from senior management.
Okay.
They need to set the tone and make it clear that security is not negotiable.
It can't be an afterthought.
It can't be an afterthought when those two things clash. They need to provide guidance and help resolve those disputes.
So security and performance need to work together.
They do.
Okay. Question 33 emphasizes aligning security initiatives with business goals. How do we prevent security from becoming its own siloed function?
You involve the business leaders in the decision-making process right from the start.
Okay.
When they're actively engaged, they understand why those security measures are in place, and they're more likely to support them.
It's about collaboration, finding solutions that work for everyone.
As-
Question 34 describes a really sneaky kind of attack manipulating transaction amounts, like rounding down and siphoning off fractions of a cent into a fraudulent account.
Yeah.
How do you even catch something like that?
Continuous monitoring of those middleware transactions, that's key.
Okay.
By analyzing those transactions in real time, you can spot those anomalies, those patterns, those tiny discrepancies that might indicate fraudulent activity.
So it's like having a microscope on those financial flows looking for anything suspicious.
Precisely.
Question 35 brings us back to that human element. Social engineering attacks. These are tricky. They prey on our psychology. How do we defend against them?
Education is the most effective way to mitigate that risk.
Okay.
By addressing those knowledge gaps and teaching employees about those phishing emails, those suspicious links, we can equip them with the tools they need to protect themselves.
It's about turning those employees into human firewalls.
Exactly. Make them part of the solution.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the foundations of information security management, delved into risk assessment and response strategies, and even gotten into the technical details of things like encryption biometrics, incident response. But I think the big takeaway for me is that holistic approach.
I completely agree. It's not just an IT issue, it's a business issue.
It's about aligning security with those strategic goals, fostering that culture of awareness, and constantly adapting to the ever-changing threat landscape.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and stay vigilant in this ever-evolving world of information security.